Well, I welcome everyone to Investing in the Frontier of Innovation Beyond the Big Five. I'm Bryce, Alec, Arun, and James. The Fidelity Global Futures Fund is a portfolio of 40 to 70 of Fidelity's best ideas in small and mid-cap stocks from around the world. And they focus on building a diversified portfolio designed to deliver more consistent returns throughout different market cycles. And using research from around 180 of Fidelity analysts around the world, these guys get to discover some of the most fascinating and exciting companies from around the world. And today we're going to bring that to life and unpack everything about the small cap fund. So let's do it.
Now, for podcast listeners, they may be familiar with James and Arun. They've been on twice, and we're really excited to have them back at FinFest. Now, the topic of this session is investing in the frontier of innovation beyond the big five. And that's because so much of the past decade we've invested in 5 major companies: Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet. They've driven the biggest index in the world and they've been on the forefront of innovation. But James and Arun are looking beyond those big 5 and they're looking in the small and mid-cap world. So why is that the world where you're looking for the next big innovators?
Look, we just love it because there's such breadth and depth in that universe. It's stocks from, say, 1 or 2 billion right up to 50 billion market cap. There's so many themes that you can get access to. They're young companies, but they're not that young. They're generally 10 to 15 years old. But the breadth and depth of opportunity is really, really massive. And when they take on the world, they've got this huge runway of growth, and that's why it's really, really exciting.
And also from our perspective, they're relatively under-researched. There's not as many people looking at those stocks as there are looking at Google or Apple. So it creates more opportunities to find mispriced securities, and it really allows us to be able to find these multi-baggers and stocks that you can sort of get into and hold for a long period of time, and they go up 4, 5, 10, 20x in some cases, and they're really exciting to sort of share the journey with.
Yeah, nice.
You can see on the slide you've got these 5 different themes. It's got the examples down below of stocks that we actually have in the portfolio. And these are really exciting structural growth themes that are going to be there for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, really strong. So,
well, if people want to take a photo of the slide so they can do their own research on some of the stocks, now's the time.
So we love hearing about specific stocks at Equity Mates. So let's actually bring to life some of the opportunities that you guys are talking about by hearing about some of the top holdings in your fund. We'll start with Arista Networks. It's in your top 10. So Maroon, let's start with who are they, for those here who haven't heard of Arista, and how are they innovating?
Yeah, so Arista, I mean, we just talked about this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago for those that haven't listened, but Arista, really interesting. They make switches which go into networks, so really big into cloud computing, data centers. Their 2 largest customers are Microsoft and Meta. Was previously Facebook, but they also sell directly to Fortune 500 companies. So if you're a large bank or a supermarket, for example, you want to be on the cloud, but you don't want to be on a public cloud like AWS. You want to have your own private cloud for security reasons. You could also go to directly to Arista. They compete with 2 major players, Cisco and Juniper. A lot of people may have heard of Cisco. And what these guys do is innovate. So they got a jump start on the 100 gigabyte product cycle many years ago. They caught their competitors napping, and they were able to sort of gain share from pretty low starting base, and now they're sort of feared in that space. And we quite like what they do. Very interesting company. I've had the fortune to be able to meet them a couple of times in Silicon Valley. Very well regarded outfit, so we quite like them.
Great. And then as investors, you're looking for a few key traits from companies: a strong competitive moat, an ability to generate sustainable returns into the future. Does Arista have those characteristics?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you sort of think about, as a starting point, what's the industry growing like? And so you look at forecasts for the next 5 years. Data centers are forecast to grow 20% annually for the next 5 years. Cloud computing's forecast to grow 15% annually for the next 5 years. So as a starting point, the industry's got this nice tailwind. And just for context, Arista has grown its revenues 35% per annum for the past decade. So, super high growth company. We think they'll be able to continue to grow quite well and outgrow the market. they are a lot more product and tech-led versus their peers. So if I sort of compare them to Cisco, Cisco tends to be a bit more marketing and sales driven, whereas these guys are a lot more tech focused. And that's sort of why they were able to innovate on that 100 gigabyte product cycle a few years ago and sort of caught their competitors napping. They're innovating now, they're onto the 400 gigabyte product cycle. So they're able to sort of maintain and parlay that lead in product and tech innovation and sort of take it to the next level. And so we think they'll continue to grow. The other thing as well is they just have a phenomenal management team. So the co-founder is a guy by the name of Andy Bechtolsheim. He was a co-founder of Sun Microsystems many years ago in sort of the internet wave 1.0 back in sort of the 90s. Sold that business to Oracle for $7 billion. Went on to start a company called Granite Systems. Sold that, funnily enough, to Cisco for a couple of $100 million. And he's also the first investor in Google. So at the time, Larry Page and Sergey Brin had a concept. They didn't even have an incorporated company. It wasn't even legally incorporated. They came to him with an idea. He gave him a $100,000 check and sort of got Google up and running. So he's very well regarded. He's the chair. And the CEO is a lady by the name of Jay Shree. She's got a very long history in Silicon Valley, worked in semiconductors at AMD and Fairchild for a number of years. Ended up working at Cisco, driving their switches business, funnily enough, for 15 years. And then Andy managed to poach her and brought her across to Arista, and she's been leading the charge there for 15 years. So, with the chair and the CEO vastly experienced and having delivered, a solid track record, we think they'll be able to sort of continue that going forward.
And Maroon, just briefly to close out, returns of many IT companies over the last 12 months have been pretty volatile or even significantly down for the past year. What gives you the confidence that Arista has that sort of long-term growth potential?
Yeah, so actually, funnily enough, Arista's share price is up about 8 or 9% for the past 12 months, and the market's down about 15%. And that's really been driven by upgrades. So revenue and earnings upgrades for 22 and for 2023 have been revised up by about 20 or 30%. So it's really driven that share price. And it's not just a one-off. I mean, if you look at the last 5 or 6 years, Arista has outperformed the S&P 500 by a factor of 3. So, Apple, Amazon, all those big guys, Arista's actually been doing a whole lot better than them from a share price perspective. So it's getting the upgrades, the operational momentum is there. We think it'll be able to sort of continue that going forward.
Fascinating company, one for everyone to put on their watch list and do their own research on. James, let's turn to you. Icon Pharmaceuticals is another company in your fund. It was founded in Dublin. It's more than 30 years old. And it's a pharmaceutical company that doesn't manufacture drugs. Instead, it conducts clinical trials. So tell us about the company.
Yeah, so the mission, as Icon has just come up, is their goal is to accelerate the bringing of molecules to the market with medicine. So basically, accelerating the development of clinical trials right up from molecule and idea right through to bringing it into medicine and trying to improve people's lives, extend lives, and save lives. That's what their goal is. A fascinating business, really is.
So what drives the success of a company like Icon, and how does it match that investment criteria that we've spoken about on the show and earlier?
Yeah, so look, the thing is, it's a business that started with 5 people. It now has 40,000 employees, founded only in 1990, so it's only 30 years old. But it really relies on trust. So its job is to, as I said, get an idea of a molecule, a piece of molecule that's going to solve a medical problem for the world, and take that right to commercialization. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, clinical trials, choosing the actual patients that are going to do the clinical trials, that are actually going to prove up this medicine. And that is a really difficult job. And it's trust, it is trust. And that's what Maroon and I love in stocks in our company that we own. A lot of it is a big trust element, and you can't build trust. You can't go to a factory and create trust that your customers are going to love. You can't go to a cheaper country and get a cheaper thing that means you trust someone. Trust is something that takes years and decades, especially in this environment where you've got governments, suppliers, medical, labs, documentation to basically develop in order to develop a drug that is going to save, extend, or improve people's lives. So that for us, it's just a very unique business, has very huge compound earnings. It's a very unique thing that it does in the world, but trust is underlying it all, which is really like something, as I said, it's very unique.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And a lot of us may not have heard of Icon Pharmaceuticals, but we've probably benefited from their work because they partnered with Pfizer around COVID. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story and maybe bring to life the role Icon plays?
Yeah, so Icon, it's not generally known by the public, but Icon was behind the Pfizer vaccination development, which is pretty cool, pretty amazing. This company in Ireland, which is also in Ireland and America. But they took the molecule, from molecule to the emergency use of COVID in 250 days. And that, like I said, that is their mission, to accelerate the movement of molecules to medicine, to improve and save people's lives. And the fact that we're here today after 2 years of lockdowns, it has definitely helped our life, this business with Pfizer. So it is quite cool that actually is the company behind Pfizer's ability to move to a vaccine within 250 days. So it's a very proud thing for Icon, a very proud thing for Ireland as well, because it's an Irish-based business. But yeah, that was it's based on so many different things. The clinical trials was in 9 countries and 50,000 people. They had 1,000 people working on that within 30 days. There was just a huge amount of things that happened really, really quickly that allowed them to do that 250-day from end to end. And that was what the power of this business is. And that the frontier of innovation, as this session's about, that's what this is a great example of. So
Yeah, I love that. Well, let's turn our attention to the third stock, Maroon, and that is SolarEdge, which is a play on renewables. Another company in your top 10 holdings, and as I said, a theme that is important to many people in this room, which is that renewables. So SolarEdge, what do they do and how are they innovating?
Yeah, so SolarEdge, it's an Israeli company but listed in the US, similar to Icon, started off by a group of 5 scientists. It's now got 4,000 employees, 26 countries around the world in terms of office locations, but its products have been used in over 130 countries around the world, including Australia. It's got revenues on track this year of about $3 billion US and operating profits of $300 million US this year. So it's not small, but it's something that perhaps a lot of people haven't heard of. And if you sort of think about a solar system, you've got your panels, which are getting the sunlight, and then below that there's what's known as inverters, which sort of take that light and then convert it into electricity that we can sort of use. And the legacy technology is something called string inverters, where all the panels are connected together via a string. And it's like a Christmas light analogy, where if you get like one bulb going out, the rest of the string is compromised. So if you have a whole system on your roof, and then there's a tiny part of it that, for whatever reason, either the angle of the roof or there's a tree nearby that's causing shading, in the string technology, which is the old legacy technology, the output of the entire system is brought down to the level of the compromised cell. Even though the remainder of the system can actually produce full output. So what SolarEdge did was actually create these things called power optimizers, and they basically allow each cell to work independently. So if you've got 90% of your system that's receiving full sunlight, they're going to be producing maximum output, and only that little tiny part that's compromised has a reduced power output. So what that means is you get a whole lot more efficiency, a whole lot more power output, and ultimately greater return on investment for your solar system. And from that, they've sort of branched out into developing batteries. They're also doing some work on EVs as well. So they've sort of taken that inverter core technology and sort of expanding that out into the broader renewable space.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating and important industry. And when we speak to experts on the podcast, wind feels like an area where there's a few big players, but in solar there's hundreds of players, and the cost curve for solar is incredible. I think it's down, like the cost of producing solar is down 80% or something over the past decade. But there are so many companies doing it. I guess why SolarEdge, and how do they separate themselves when there's so many players in the space?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the players are actually in making the panels. because that's relatively low tech now. It's become, quite frankly, commoditized. China has about 80% market share globally in that, and it's just a game of scale. The more panels you produce, you bring down your cost of manufacturing, and you can just ship it out a lot quicker. And that's not an area that SolarEdge play in. Like I said, where they play in is the inverter space, and they don't even play in the legacy string inverters. They play in these areas where it's sort of higher edge. So there's two main players that sort of give you that technology at the inverter level. There's them and there's Enphase, another US company. And between them in the US, they have about 80% market share of sort of that high-end inverter space. So in that little niche that they play in, it's not very competitive. And a lot of that comes down to, I think, their technological advantage. So these guys were the first to come to market with a technology that could compete better than string technology. They've been selling it for over a decade. Every year they spend about 10% of their revenues into R&D. So this year they'll spend about $300 million US. So if you sort of think about a new entrant wanting to come in, their IP level is here, you're starting from here. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to sort of keep that IP level growing. So there's a lot of spending required for you. And then finally, if you're a solar installer, you've used their products for the past decade, it's always been trustworthy, it's always been reliable, everyone's had a good experience. Are you then going to go out and take a punt on a new startup that promises to be 5% better or 5% cheaper, but you don't really know if they're reliable? Because in the end, if the system goes down, you as the installer, you're going to be the one that sort of cops a phone call from the angry consumer. So in order for someone to sort of come along and get meaningful market share amongst the solar installer community, you're probably going to have to come in and offer a big step change, something that's 50 or 60% better. And the likelihood of you doing that when they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year into R&D is pretty low. So we think they've got not only a competitive advantage today, but they've got the ability to sort of maintain that competitive advantage going forward. They're already profitable, generating good returns, lots of free cash. So we really like the idea of that being able to sort of stay ahead of the curve going forward.
Awesome. Well, there was 3 companies that sort of demonstrate investing outside of the big 5. We had Arista Networks, Icon Pharmaceuticals, and SolarEdge. And James, to close out today, it's a pretty daunting time in markets at the moment. It's volatile. It can feel pretty scary to, I guess, remain invested, remain sort of focused on the long term. So how do you think about investing in markets like we are facing right now?
Look, today the world is throwing everything at equity markets to get this multiple down that's almost possible. So inflation in commodities, labor, everything. Basically just everything is inflation driven right now. You've also got a lot of risk, a lot of uncertainty around economic growth, and you've got geopolitics risk is still there as well. So for us, we still focus on the long term. It is about returns. What we follow is the return on capital, and that's really what you've got to focus on. So we have up here on the slide what's happened over 10 years for the stocks in our fund, in our top 10 today. And these are stocks, as you can see, that have gone up 300%, 400%, 500%. In the case of Li-Ning, which is like a Nike of China, 19 times over a decade. So these are the stocks that are in our top 10. That's what they have done over the decade. And that's really that compounding return, what we call beautiful compounders or niche businesses that there's a lot of trust involved, that they just keep on compounding, growing their customer base, penetrating different countries, adjacencies in markets, or adjacencies in countries. So this is what's possible over a decade, and that's what I guess we are here for. We're here for the long term, and that's what just shows you what's possible over the longer term.
I can see a lot of people getting their phones out and taking photos of the slide, and please feel free to do that. If you want to hear James and Maroon talk more about their top 10 holdings, jump over to the Equity Mates podcast. We've interviewed them twice. We've spoken about a lot of these stocks. And you can also jump on the Fidelity website. I'm sure there's plenty more information there. But James, Maroon, we want to say a massive thank you for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you.
Can we all give them a round of applause?
Thanks
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
demais!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.